Let's kind of, as we traditionally do, we try to frame our discussions around the NIST cybersecurity framework, which has 5 pillars to it. We oftentimes oversimplify it a lot, but the same graphic, I guess, done this way, I prefer a little bit, only because 3 simple things. One, it reminds us that the first step in any security planning and even budgeting and so forth is to identify what it is you want to protect. How much is that data or money worth to you, reputational damage, and try to give some thoughts regarding that first. Secondly, the detection being right at the heart of things. We believe strongly that if you're not looking for problems, you probably won't see problems, and you might feel a false sense of security. Detection systems, whether they be consoles of today, need to be aggregated, they need to be evaluated, they need to be managed, today's detection systems. And last is, I like the way that prevention and reaction are equally balanced in this graphic, in that a lot of people focus on protecting, leaving little dollars or resources or time left for how they're going to respond when something does occur. We're seeing a lot of compromises with our customer accounts, and we'll talk about some specific areas where we're seeing that throughout this presentation. So in the news, 5 stories this month. I had 4, but then the 5th one just kind of creeps in there as it always does with patching. So let's discuss some of these. Some have some interesting terms to them, and there are some interesting stories from the month of August. We had an ATM Cashout. I'll walk you through the 2-day timeline where the FBI, provided a number of warnings about an imminent cash out that was about to occur, and then how 2 days later how it occurred, where it occurred, and so forth, and what that really means. We'll also talk about crypto mining. We'll talk about it as it relates to here a number of fonts and shortcuts, believe it or not, are the latest carriers of malware that's specifically defined as crypto mining malware, which is a whole other string of occurrences that can occur if you get some malware. We'll also talk about something known in the security industry called a SIM swap. We'll talk about a couple different ways this can occur and what you as a business might have to be concerned about if SIM swap occurs with one of your employees. For the last several months, we certainly have been seeing a significant amount of activity on business email compromises. Some might know this as impersonation emails, or some might just generically call it phishing emails, but it's basically emails with the intention of directing money to someone else's account. And we're seeing approximately 1 a week at this point in our customer base. If you're not concerned about it, you should be. And we'll talk about, we had a webinar on this last week. We'll just give you the quick down and dirty with regards to what it is you can do to help mitigate some of that in your environment. And last but not least, as we do every month, it seems, we have a number of patches that came out, and I want to give you a quick overview on what Microsoft released and what some of the dangers are, and talk about patch strategy. All right, so ATM Cashout. Interesting story here. This is there are several ATM vulnerabilities. One is called jackpotting, where they actually can get inside the ATM, put some malicious software in there, and when it goes to spit out money, it spits out a whole bunch more. This is not jackpotting. ATM Cashout is a different occurrence. It's basically a 2-stage attack where it's usually done on small and mid-sized banks where protection mechanisms might be a little more lax. In this particular case, this was not done on customer accounts, but this was on operational accounts. There's a lot of homework done in advance to find out, to basically, you're probably going to phish the bank, you're going to get some credentials, you're going to get in, take a look at their administrative procedures for how they run their ATMs. You're going to see if you have capabilities to get an admin account to modify those controls and things like that. And because of all this activity, you're probably, if you have some, if that runs detected, right, this is where the FBI on the 12th of August sent out a confidential alert to all small and medium banks, for which you may be running one, and it basically said, hey, criminals are planning an ATM cash out. We're not sure where, but if you're a bank, it asks you to be extremely cautious at this time. What effectively happens is they take some data that they've stolen with regards to legitimate accounts. They then create a series of ATM cards that are clones, and all at once, within a series of hours, they effectively branch out to a number of countries, and they go to various ATM machines, and they withdraw money all within a very short period of time. Due to the fact that the controls were changed back at the bank, there are oftentimes no limits on the cash withdrawals. There's no alerts and flags thrown up. And indeed, on the 14th of this month, it happened to be in this time a bank called Cosmos, where $11.5 million of unauthorized ATMs were withdrawn in a number of hours. This occurred earlier this year at National Bank of Blacksburg, Virginia, for $2.4 million. So the cash outs occur. One of the recommendations they're saying is obviously, run detection systems internally, verify when things are happening, be careful of phishing. And the one thing that they're strongly emphasizing through all of this, as the FBI, for banking clients as well as others, is to implement MFA especially on important accounts, but on most accounts are relevant for MFA. So I point out just a couple slides here. Accounts are going to get leaked out there, and they're going to get out there in one of three ways. People are either going to guess your account because people use terrible passwords. Here's a list of the top 50 most used passwords, and none of them has very much strength to it. So if people are using poor passwords, that's certainly one way that they could be guessed. Secondly, they could be purchased. Okay, all of these compromises that have occurred, of which I've got a small scattering on the screen, have produced a number of login credentials that are available out on the dark web. They can be purchased in blocks of millions. You can buy, more recent ones for, very inexpensive pennies on the dollar type of purchases for logins and passwords, even some that have been verified. And third is they can be phished. Okay, so obviously preventing phishing mechanisms and so forth. But assuming your credentials have been compromised, the only way really to protect yourself after that is to use multi-factor authentication. So a lot of people have walked into this with some intrepidation. Hey, how do I get started with MFA? Or boy, my users are really going to fight back against the experience and so forth. And it's because of some of this friction that we found it's best to see it, try it, to field test it, if you will, with your user base. And we've got a turnkey solution for enabling 10 users to have MFA, have an experience that they enjoy, set up the discussion about app passwords and so forth. Got a question about from Gianna about the Fiserv breach. I just got information about that yesterday, and thought about including it, but it didn't make the cut on my 5. Certainly is a warranted and large breach that is going to affect customers. Fiserv, as we may or may not know, is the core processing for many of the banks in their area. They're a very large core processor, and they had a breach yesterday I just caught wind of, and likely is going to make next month. Okay, so MFA, if you want to try it in your environment, we have a turnkey offering for getting 10 users up and running on it, and using some logic to give them the best experience possible across all browsers and applications. All right, second story I wanted to touch base on was something called cryptomining, cryptojacking. Nate had actually referred to me an interesting story. Nate, what was the 1% of today's power usage?
Yeah, 1% of global energy use goes directly to crypto mining.
Significant stat. Obviously hard to even think about that. But I guess what I wanted to make sure you were aware of is that two recent uses of how malware has come into our environment are kind of unique. One is through dangerous font packages. That's the story I kind of have highlighted here. A second one is through shortcuts. Believe it or not, the way Windows 10 handles shortcuts has come under scrutiny, and this month's patching has a patch to remediate poor handling of shortcuts that would allow malware to ride along on a shortcut. So the goal here is not necessarily to discuss completely the methods. Obviously the goal is to keep patching up to date and so forth, but these unique methods for which they're getting in there is interesting. And I guess it points out two things, as you can kind of see on the screen. The frequency of attacks on supply chains and the use of cryptocurrency miners as a mean for monetizing malware. So malware is changing from just trying to do harm to someone's machine or trying to solicit data to now crypto mining and cryptojacking are a process by which your machine is used at the time of the hacker's choosing to be pointed with its processing power over to break key codes on crypto mines and basically steal money from those that have money that might be locked up under certificate keys that could be cracked with sufficient processing power. So both of these are just kind of methods by which that can happen. And again, the solutions for things like this are, really good antivirus, well managed, really good patching programs. And I would be remiss to say that this is a routine. People don't think of their workstations as much more than a commodity nowadays. On average, an endpoint costs 6 times the amount to manage it per year than the hardware cost. So how do you drive that cost down? I think in a lot of cases, you look for things like standardization or good management software, but another way is simply to outsource it. We've got a solution and we're doing a significant amount of patching, antivirus management for our customer base. And something like this is running in the ballpark of $10 to $15 per workstation per month to completely get out of the game of end workstation management. So it might be an attractive option for you, and we certainly would be happy to have a conversation with you about it. All right, SIM swappers. This one kind of brings it close to home for me here. It's called SIM swap. It is a kind of a recent phenomenon. There are 2 goals out of SIM swap, neither of which are very attractive or convenient for you. One is certainly more dangerous for your business than the other. I'll give you here, I guess, a couple examples. In August, there was a legal case that came up where someone is suing AT&T for several $1,000,000 in this case because this gentleman had $24 million worth of digital currencies that were stolen from him due to the fact that his credentials were tied to his cryptocurrency accounts, were also tied to his phone, to his SIM card. And through essentially a compromise of AT&T systems, and this would be specifically a compromise of AT&T customer reps, AT&T, I keep pointing to AT&T, but this could be Verizon or any of the other major providers, effectively where a representative is convinced that you are John Doe, and you have provided sufficient evidence that you are John Doe, and you can claim that your SIM card needs to be disabled and moved to a different phone. And effectively, with that SIM move, if you will, through convincing a legitimate agent that needs to be moved, suddenly, as I would have experienced on my phone, suddenly your phone stops working. Right? It could happen in the middle of the day. All of a sudden, your phone no longer says no connection. And this happened for myself, for my wife, and my son. And after calling the AT&T fraud department, it was discovered, oh yeah, I assume you were not in San Diego at a Best Buy recently. And I was like, no, I was not. And they're like, oh, okay, your phone was swapped out effectively through a customer service agent out there. And the phone was, the SIM card was enabled in another phone. Now there's 2 goals for that. One is essentially a stolen phone oftentimes is paired up with one of these new quote-unquote active SIM cards for a brief period of time for a sale of a phone with a legitimate plan on it, and then after obviously the SIM card is detected as stolen, maybe 24 or 48 hours, the sale of that device, the person that has it is kind of a buyer beware, right? They've lost the capability to have phone service from there forward, but they pay a pretty penny for it. A second and kind of more dangerous area is that during that time that your SIM card is available or has been stolen, and you've taken a while to recognize the fact that I'm not connecting to any networks any longer, your phone and your MFA card, which is tied to your SIM card, oftentimes is subject to scrutiny. So bank accounts that use that MFA card and so forth could be accessed during that short time window before you recognize it. So in either case, SIM swap frauds are on the increase, and the logical thing is to have a response plan to notify your employees that if suddenly their phone stops working, that you want to declare this as an incident internally, that you want to be protective of those accounts around that user, especially during the time frame when they're going through the reconciliation process. For myself, I know I had to personally go into an AT&T store, contact the fraud department. They had to give us new SIM cards, and while I was able to stop the service here within maybe an hour of it occurring, and they said, wow, you were very fast about that, it still took about 48 hours for me to be made whole and have a phone back and so forth. So incident response plans are certainly a logical portion of this. It also ties in, obviously, with the idea that while multi-factor authentication might be tied to your phone, a lot of people want to kind of say, oh, phones are a terrible way to do multi-factor authentication. Remember that it's kind of one of those baby in the bathwater items, right? You don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater at the same time. So MFA predominantly is about easy usage and making sure it's well adopted. And yes, there is an industry issue where phones can be used for a brief period during this, but and so to the point that Rob's asking, isn't this why most carriers are now requiring the use of PINs to cut back on social engineering? You have to set up your PIN now if you don't like it. It's exactly right. Actually, in addition, your carriers have a PIN to access your account, and that was the first thing that was set up for us also when contacting AT&T. It wasn't something I had even thought about before, but your login and password, which we had discussed earlier, likely is possibly out there. If that's used to manage your AT&T or Verizon or Sprint accounts, those can be accessed in there. And so they typically offer a what they call high security, or a PIN, effectively, that can be put up in addition to your password to provide lack of access onto the online portal to change your AT&T account. So yes, that's exactly right, Rob. So multi-factor authentication is still a great solution around these, and in addition to pointing out the fact that we have a turnkey pilot for that, I'd also ask you to think about your incident response plan. Are you prepared to handle things like this? What would be your 5 first activities you would do if an employee came to you and said, by the way, my phone was hijacked over the weekend? What are you going to do? What data would you be concerned about? Who would you provide notifications to? What would be your internal run book for that? And so we certainly have managed incident response plans that we enact, and would be happy to discuss your incident response plans. The fourth item, which I don't think I put a number on here in the upper corner, but as we move here into the fourth topic, business email compromise. As mentioned, we're getting one of these a week. They're ranging, our stories range from, we had a customer a few weeks ago that had lost a significant amount of money in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. We've had customers where we've been engaged to evaluate their mailboxes, and we're seeing what they call the impersonation stage right at that time. So some are just getting it before the breach. Let's take a look at a few things that we're doing to help our customers evaluate what stage they're at. I kind of look at the stages similar to this. Are you oftentimes login mailboxes are compromised, and that's where you want to find it. Sometimes they're in watching, learning, and waiting mode, the hackers. If they're in impersonation mode already, that means they're already sending out emails on behalf of your employee, and you might just not know about it. And that's certainly the most dangerous stage, because that's when the potential is there, communications are occurring. And oftentimes, as was the case in our larger breach, we only saw it afterwards when we saw them trying to cover their tracks. So these are kind of an overview of what the process looks like, but trying to catch these people as often as early as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to look for foreign mailboxes on foreign logins to mailboxes. In some international organizations, obviously this is expected, but to look at what the variances are when you're expecting it, looking at weird logins to mailboxes, whether those be foreign or from an Amazon Web Service. These are things that we're monitoring on a daily basis for our customers across all of their hundreds of mailboxes. Another example is looking for forwarding. Obviously, forwarding is a legitimate capability, right, that users have always had. What we're concerned about are the illegitimate forwardings, right, that are occurring, so that people are having this treasure trove of email communication about your organization outside of your control. And I point to Gmail here in this particular case, could be others. Other things we're looking for services that are turned on your mailboxes that don't need to be on. IMAP and POP3 are turned on by default, always have been in many instances, including Office 365. Why, right? Those could be turned off very safely and certainly lower your footprint. A few others I'll just kind of point out. We're looking for stale mailboxes. We're looking that should have been deleted a while ago that could be used for trapping emails. We're looking for strange forwarding or delegate access to other mailboxes that might be strange. We're making sure that auditing's on. There's a series of 18 to 45, it kind of depends on which audit we're doing, different checks that we're doing on your Office 365 mailboxes, either on a daily, weekly basis, and looking for variances. We're seeing indicators all over the place, and we think that security auditing in Office 365 is a good area to turn for looking at business email compromise. It's not a panacea, though. We think our, this slide, which is a brief overview of from our webinar last week. I won't go through each of the solutions in detail, but you need to pair this. This is defense in depth, right? You need to pair this up with your social engineering exercises in the upper left. You need to have a good incident response plan for when an email compromise does occur. We certainly have been called in when email compromises have occurred dozens of times at this point, and we have a run book. We know what to do. We know how to gather evidence. We know who needs to communicate when. So we can supplement your incident response plan when needed. There's some technologies that are out there, including MFA and some capabilities within both Microsoft ATP, and then I'd be here to announce that Microsoft is going to be rolling some of their ATP features, which is ATP has always been a add-on technology, into their Office 365 Exchange Online Protection Plan. It's not comprehensive, but it is a start on some new capabilities to limit impersonation. So a lot of technology. I'd ask you to kind of look out on our website. Our most recent blog is an overview of business email compromise webinar with a 90-second video and so forth. All right, the fifth and final story, like we do almost every month now, it seems, but Microsoft came out with a number of vulnerabilities. This month it was 60 vulnerabilities with about 17 updates. 2 of them were 0-day, meaning there's no solution for it yet from the industry providers. Patching is going to help. Adobe also had a number, 5 major updates in their Adobe Reader software. Again, at least Kurt Krebs' stance is disable Adobe if you don't, the Flash player if you don't need it. All right, and there's a link there to a month without Adobe Flash player and kind of what websites are using it and how it's being used. It all goes to process, though. What is your process? the patches have been released, how quickly are these going to be on your systems, both on your server systems, which might be, tiered, tier 1 through tier 3 type servers. What's your patching strategy? Is it get it all within there and be up to snuff within 30 days? Is it longer? Is it shorter? Do you have an emergency patching scenario? Who validates that patches were done? Are you doing reboots to make sure that things come up smooth? Do you have a service level agreement for this? Is there a shared understanding with the board for your organization as to how and when you're doing patching? So we do this for about 1,900 systems nowadays. Our patchings generally, 5 servers to be patched each month. It's about $50 a month. Okay, it's not an expensive service. Again, by doing this repetitively across 1,400 systems or 1,900 systems, we've got some knowledge with regards to which patches are breaking things and making sure that those don't get implemented on your systems. We've got where the troubles begin, which patches are likely getting rolled back, things of that nature. So patching experience is something that needs to be injected into your process. We've got blogs, as mentioned. The Business Email Compromise blog has a short video as well as a number of PowerPoints for you to get educated about email compromise, start taking some action internally. We try to put a blog or 2 up per week. We've got some free offerings we're trying to put out there just so customers can experience. Maybe you've got some concerns or want to take a look at Office 365 and you're like, hey, let's see what it is I should be doing. I want to know how to do foreign mailbox logins. We've got a capability and kind of got a lot of this scripted and into a portal that would allow us as a service to kind of do that for you relatively inexpensively, less expensive than you're probably able to do it yourself just because we've got the things scripted. So free security audit, free phishing test. If you're not doing phishing, we'd ask you to, let's go figure out if your employees, like most, are about 27% click happy, is what we're seeing across industries. Obviously, in addition to today's webinar, we've got another webinar at the end of next month, and we've got an in-person event for those that are local to attend, something called SIP Snacks and Security. I'm going to bring in 5 vendors. We're going to have some discussions in small rooms, just little 5 and 10 minute kind of meet and greet and overviews of, threat hunting and forensics and other business email compromise and some of the pulse managed solutions, and just have some discussions around security over some drinks and eats. So hoping to see you there, and we're proud of who we are, I guess, and happy to help you out. So